again, Mark here from Talkingbass. So, as many of you are aware, last week saw the release of the new Ultimate Music Theory for Bass Guitar course over at Talkingbass. In that course, there is a massive amount of theory content, but one of the most useful areas of music theory for bass is the study of harmony. How chords are built, how chord progressions work, how melodies relate to chords, and most important for us, how bass lines, fills, and solos are constructed over any chords, be it just one or many. In this course, I cover all areas of harmony from the absolute basics all the way through to advanced jazz harmony concepts, and today we're going to look at one of the most basic of lessons from Volume 1 in the shape of triad arpeggios. Learning how triads are created and how they can be used sets the scene for everything else going forward, and this knowledge is probably the most game-changing for beginners when it comes to creating and learning bass lines and songs. So remember, this is a music theory course, so we're going to deep dive into some of the nuts and bolts of all this stuff. So get ready for a fair amount of info. There's a link to the course in the description below, so let's get into it. Harmony is an incredibly important subject for all musicians, not least bass players. Most songs that we play are made up of chord progressions. Bass lines outline chord progressions, even if we're only playing root notes for each chord. To create a more interesting bass line, or a fill, or a solo, we need to learn the notes of those chords. By making use of the notes of the chords, we can weave melodic bass lines through the progression, create catchy riffs, and play exciting fills. A knowledge of chord progressions will also help with learning songs as you start to recognize popular sequences and how they relate to a key. So for bass players, studying harmony will help out your playing and writing a lot. Most songs and pieces that you hear in Western music, from classical to pop to rock and country, are all generally based on something called tertian harmony. Yep, you don't hear that term used every day, but it's actually a concept that once you understand it, will change your perspective on learning music and make for a much easier ride when it comes to learning about chords and chord progressions. So let's get into that. Tertian harmony refers to the creation of chords by stacking thirds. We've already covered our major and minor thirds, so how do we stack them? Well, the most basic of chords is a triad, a 3-note chord. A 2-note chord would be a dyad, but that's just a single interval, like a tenth. When we place the 2 thirds together, we get a triad. So let's take a simple major third interval built from a C root note here at the 3rd fret of the A string. So that's going to be C to E. 3rd fret A string, 2nd fret D string. That's our major third. Then if we build a minor third from the E, we have E to G. So that's 2nd fret to 5th fret on the D string. That's a major third and a minor third. So we've got major third, minor third. And so for those notes we have C, E, and G. That is a C major triad. So obviously we didn't play an actual chord there. If we were to play a C major triad, a chord, it would sound like this. So there I'm playing those 3 notes, C, E, and G, as a block chord. C, E, G. The individual notes of a chord are called chord tones. So C, E, and G are the chord tones of the C major triad. If we play each chord tone separately as a line, we have an arpeggio. So we have a chord made up of chord tones that we can play as an arpeggio. Arpeggios are the usual way that we learn about chord construction on bass guitar, and it's these chord tones that we use in creating bass lines. Now, even though we build triads from stacked thirds in this way, we'll usually describe their construction relative to the root note. So for a major triad, we have the root note, the major third, and then a perfect fifth. Yes, as subsequent intervals, it's actually a major third and then a minor third. But when we relate all of that back to the root note, to the C, it's root, major third, and perfect fifth. So C, root note, E is a major third from the root, G is a perfect fifth from the root. Major triads are usually just called major chords and are the most common chords in all of Western music. As chord symbol notation, they're written as simple root notes. So C major would be written as C. F major would be written as F. You might also occasionally see major chords written with an uppercase M or Maj, M-A-J, or in jazz writing as a triangle. You'll see chord symbols written in all kinds of musical charts, usually written above the staff. This tells the musician what chord is to be played over the written line, be it a vocal melody, a piano part, a bass line, or whatever. We as bass players will often read chord symbols as a guide to creating a bass part. So first of all, just try playing that major triad up and down. So we've got the C, E, G, 3rd fret A string, 2nd and 5th frets on the D string, up and down. Then you can try running it up and down the fretboard chromatically, just to get used to that finger pattern. So C, C sharp, D, just as we did with the intervals before and the scales, all the way up to the C, up at the top, and then just come back down. Okay, all the way back down to C. You can also try running that major triad through the cycle of 4, so you could try just playing it with root notes on a single E string, let's say, C, then down to F, B flat, E flat, A flat, and so on. Maybe on the A string as well, or you could just try in a single position down in the low area, C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, and so on. Now let's just try a very simple bass line making use of major triads. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So here we're just playing through a simple chord progression of C, F, and G. C major, F major, G major. So we're using the triads, C major, starting at the 3rd fret of the A string, then F major, starting at the 3rd fret of the D string, then G major, starting at the 3rd fret of the E string. And we're just using the rhythm. So just playing twice on that root note and then just coming up. So 1, 2, and 3, 4. C, F, C, G. So that's a very simple example of how you might use a major triad in making a bass line through a chord progression. The chord progression there was C major, F major, C major, G major, and we used the notes of those chords to create the bass line, and you can hear that chord progression being implied in the bass line. You don't need any chords to be played, you don't need a guitar playing it, you don't need keyboards. You can hear the chord progression of in the bass line. Now, if you've been playing for a while, you'll probably recognize that major arpeggio pattern. You'll have seen it in many different bass lines. Look for the chord tones of that major arpeggio whenever you're learning bass riffs, and for bonus points, relate them to the chord being played in the harmony. So the major triad is created by stacking 2 thirds. We've got the major third and then the minor third, but we can obviously perform the opposite stacking too. We can stack a major third onto a minor third. So let's build a minor third on C. Okay, so 3rd fret of the A string. For the minor third, we're going to play the minor third there up to the E flat. So that's going to be 6th fret of the A string, and then we build a major third from that E flat, which gives us the G. So C, E flat, G. That is a C minor triad. C, E flat, G. We've got the minor third and then the stacked major third. Okay, so as a refresher, for the major triad, we had a major third and then a minor third, and then for the minor triad, we've got minor third and then the major third. And as before, we can look at those arpeggios relative to the root note. So for that minor triad, we've got the root note, the minor third, and the perfect 5th relative to the C. So as a refresher, for the major triad, we had root, major third, perfect 5th, and then the minor triad, we've got root, minor third, perfect 5th. And obviously you can see that the only difference between the major and minor triad is the third. In the major triad, it's the major third, and in the minor triad, it's the minor third. And it's that third that gives it that difference in quality. So as a block chord, you can hear that the major triad is more uplifting and happy, and then for the minor triad, we've got that more solemn kind of sound, exactly as we looked at with the interval. So we saw the major third and the minor third, the difference. And this is why I say that intervals are the building blocks of music. The reason that the major triad and the minor triad sound different is simply because of that interval. So the intervals are the building blocks of those chords. Minor triads, which are also just called minor chords, are written as the root note followed by a lowercase m. So C minor would be written as C lowercase m. You might also see it written as C and then min, M-I-N, which is short for minor, obviously. And you'll also occasionally see it as C and then a minus sign. There are several ways to write any chord symbol, and you'll learn all of the different variations with experience. So now let's look at a riff making use of the minor triad. And all we're going to do is take that same bass line that we played before, and instead of major triads, we're going to use minor triads. So the chord progression this time is going to be C minor, F minor, C minor, G minor, which would sound like this. So if we substitute those minor triads for the majors, we have listen to how much more solemn that is. So obviously we're using the C minor triad here, 3rd, 6th frets on the A string and then the 5th fret on the D string, and then we just take that same pattern and move it up onto the F at the 3rd fret of the D string. So 3rd, 6th frets, 5th fret on the G string, then down to the G, 3rd fret of the E string, and the same again, the 6th fret on the E string, and then the 5th fret on the A string. But it's all written out there. Again, you can practice playing the major triads up and down the fretboard, just to get used to that finger movement there. And you can also try playing through the cycle of fourths. So C, F, B flat minor, E flat minor, A flat minor, and so on. As with scales, I would encourage you to also learn chords by note name. Practice the spelling of individual triads by reciting them as drills and by writing them out on manuscript paper. So, as a drill, you might recite the natural major triads like this. You might C, E, G, for C major. For D major, D, F sharp, A. Then for E major, E, G sharp, B. Then F, A, C, G, B, D, A, C sharp, E, and then B, D sharp, and F sharp. You can then work through the flats and the sharps and then work through the minor triads in the same way. As you add more chords into your recital repertoire, you'll start to create simple variations on the chords that you've previously learned. So C major would be C, E, G. For C minor, we simply drop that third by half step to E flat, giving us C, E flat, G. So you just relate them back to the majors. So once you've got that set of majors, both flats and sharps and the naturals, then the minors will seem a lot easier because you're just flattening the middle one. If you're writing out the chords on manuscripts, you can write them as vertical block chords with the notes grouped together or as arpeggios. Practice writing them out in the same order as the spelling drills. So this is going to help with your harmony knowledge and your reading, and all of these triads are all written there in the lesson material. So now we have a basic major and minor triad under our fingers, let's look at how we might make use of the chord tones in creating a simple bass line. So if we take a simple chord progression in the key of G major, just a 1, 4, 1, 5, G major, C major, G major, D major, 1 bar for each. If you were given that chord progression in a band and you had to make up a bass line, well, rhythmically, you're going to be going with whatever the drums might imply or whatever, whatever the style of the piece is. But let's say that you're given that chord progression, the first thing that you're going to come up with is probably the root notes. G, C, G, and D, which would maybe sound like this with this rhythm. We got the G, C, G, D. So that works, that's just root notes. But what if we want to add some more notes in there? Well, the chord tones are always going to be consonant. They're always going to work with the chord because they're in the chord. So we could use the fifth. The fifth is always a good second note to put in there. So remember with the triad, we've got the root, the third, and the fifth. So let's try using the fifth. So through that chord progression again. Okay, so not particularly interesting, but we've got another note in there. We're making use of that fifth, so we're getting somewhere. Now, each of those fifths that I used there were above the root note, so you could also use notes below. So remember, we're thinking more in terms of scale degrees when we're thinking of these relative to the chord. So when I say the fifth, when we play the fifth below, that's that fifth in terms of a scale degree. So we've got the G up to the D. We can't really go down on a four string bass, but then for the C, we could play the fifth below. So there I'm playing the C at the third fret of the A string and G at the third fret of the E string. So do that for the D as well. So we have a fifth above or a fifth below, so that's a little bit more interesting. We could also use the other chord tones in there. We could use the thirds. So for that G, we're going to use the third there of the B. We've got the E for the C, and we've got the F sharp for the D. So with that rhythm, so as you use these chord tones more and more, just playing around with them, the more you're going to build up a vocabulary with them, because you will learn what it sounds like to use the third, what it sounds like to use the fifth, what it sounds like to have a fifth below or a fifth above. As you learn what each of those are, a little bit like learning licks. You know, it's just vocabulary. You're learning how that sounds, and then you can just employ them as and when you want. So playing through that progression again, using a variety of the thirds and fifths, we could have and we could also use the whole arpeggio. So when we do that, we would have so that bass line is exactly as the one we played earlier in C, but down in G major. Now let's try chord progression making use of both major and minor triads. So this time we could try a 1-6-2-5 in the key of C major, which would be C major, A minor, D minor, and G major. Okay, so C, A, D, and G. So C major, A minor, D minor, G major. So first things first, let's just try playing the arpeggios as a bass line. So same rhythm again, so this time we're going to have, for the C major, then A minor, then for the D minor, move up, and then for the G major, down to G, and that's it. So the whole thing. So now we can try exploiting those individual chord tones again, and we'll start with just using the fifths. So we could use ascending or descending fifths. And also look out for use of a root, fifth, and then the upper octave. That's a very, very common pattern when you're using just fifths in there, because you can use just a root and a fifth in a lot of different bass lines. So through the progression, 3, 4. And then we could use the thirds, and remember, this is all going to be based on the chord in effect. So for the C, we're going to have the major third. For the A minor, we're going to have the minor third. For the D minor, we'll have the minor third. And then for the G major, we've got the major third. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is just a brief glimpse at how you can use chord tones in creating a bass line. And you can go really far down the road with this, and that's where the Chord Tone Essentials course comes into play. That shows you how to make use of all these chord tones, distribute them all over the fretboard, and then use them for bass lines, solos, fills, all of that. So that's quite a bit of information to assimilate and a fair amount of exercises to practice, but trust me, if you can develop a strong foundation built from intervals and triads, Most of the other elements of harmony will come easy to you. It's when you have holes in your knowledge that things start to become confusing.